It's the 8th of September, 2015, and this is episode 245. This show is intended for informational and educational purposes only. Cryptocurrency is new, empowering, and exciting, but we're not experts, just obsessed companions walking the road towards a more peer-to-peer future. On today's episode of Let's Talk Bitcoin, we're digging deep into the rebirth of the original metacoin from 2013, Mastercoin, as it becomes the Omni Protocol. Just a heads up, today's interview is edited for content but not for presentation. I should be back up to full power for Saturday's episode 246 featuring Andreas, Stephanie, and special guest Nick Szabo, but that's Saturday. Today, I'm pleased to share with you this, Omni Uncut. On today's episode, we're joined by Patrick Dugan, one of the leads of the Omni Project, which was formerly known as the Mastercoin Project. Patrick, thanks for your time.
All right, thank you very much.
So, it's been a little bit over a year since we spoke with Ron Gross, who was at the time the executive director of the Mastercoin Project. Tell us, what has happened to lead you from the Mastercoin Project and Ron Gross to the Omni Project, led by what appears to be an entirely different group of people?
Yeah, indeed. Kind of like how our bodies change cells every 7 years, something like that. So, so Ron, basically, like the first year of the project, there was an under-optimized allocation of resources, shall we say, because they had a lot of resources. So it was like, let's do bounties, let's do decentralized. And some good things came out of that. In the first 6 months, they did a bunch of bounties. They got Zathras out of that, who has ended up bringing this project across the finish line with a very, very polished C++ implementation built off of Bitcoin Core. So that was a good thing. The guys who founded Counterparty were involved in the project at that time and split off on their own. And then in the second half of that first year, they started to say, okay, well, we have this money. Let's hire people full-time in what they call role-based bounties. And Craig Sellers got involved in February of 2014 and started, they kind of developed, they launched the initial DEX, which had this one-way process of sending people Bitcoin, and then it'll give you back Mastercoins based on the limit order that you've entered. And that was multi-sig escrow. So that was the first decentralized exchange. It just wasn't very good, basically. The order book, you couldn't create liquidity. So they also had problems with the architecture. They were using Obelisk, basically. It was meta level parsing of the blockchain. So in approximately May of 2014, if I'm not mistaken, they decided to reformulate and build something that's like a hard level, natively run node based off of Bitcoin QT and Bitcoin D, which they were calling Mastercore. The desire to curtail expenditures came in, and I guess for whatever reason, Ron Gross decided, he was like looking for hiring a CEO, and I was like, well, why are you doing that? Like, aren't you sort of the CEO? And then basically David Johnson took over, and David Johnson decided to come with the rebrand, and he was seeing this vision for integrating with Factom and with MadeSafe and creating this Bitcoin blockchain-based ecosystem. And then for whatever reasons of his, David decided to focus more on Factom. And so Craig, who has been leading the team, and myself, who has been involved, I came in about a month after Craig, and my interest was always in the trading applications and the financial tools that the protocol could have. And then all the other developers, we've been sort of bringing it across the finish line this year, working on a volunteer basis. I think in this industry, if you'll call it an industry, arguably you can't really quite call it that, but there's a lot of levity that people are taking when they raise funding, and even Ethereum, which has been tremendously successful, has into this. And this was the first crowd sale, the Mastercoin sale, like 2 years ago. And it did pretty well, and they stayed long the Bitcoin, so the Bitcoin became worth millions of dollars, but they didn't hedge the Bitcoin, they didn't sell any of the Bitcoin, so it became less millions, and ultimately was spent through in that way by the end of 2014. So a lot of mistakes were made, and personally, I'm not responsible for them, but I would have liked to have gotten them to hedge. I would have liked to have had a more active role sooner at the level that I do now, and steered them away from that. But I believe in transparency, and I want to lay everything out for the public. We're not, we're the good guys. We're the people who have stuck through to the end and put in the hours, even when there wasn't cash on the table to compensate those hours. And we've got a pretty good product now, so that's the good news.
So Mastercoin was one of the first, I was actually the first on the blockchain fundraiser that I can remember. I'm pretty sure that it broke that concept open back in, I guess it would have been summer of 2013. So right after we started Let's Talk Bitcoin, Mastercoin's been around as a going concern. Just as you were talking, one of the things that struck me is something that one of my co-founders at Token likes to say, Devin Weller. It says that you have to build it once to know what it is that you're building so that you can then see how to actually build it right the second time. And it strikes me that a lot of the things that you said there, seem to kind of fall into that category of there's a lot of firsts that happened here. And, money, if it sounds like you feel like money could have been better, and certainly that was a conclusion I came to a long time ago. Moving forward, I mean, so after this transition happened, and after I guess David Johnston stepped away from that role. So what happened next? Where was the transition from Mastercoin over to the Omni Project? And frankly, who stayed?
So the rebrand was actually David's idea, and I supported it. And I think David's got a pretty sharp idea of what kind of app tokens or financial instruments are going to be marketable and whatnot. So like the whole Mastercoin, kind of like Master Blaster from like Thunderdome, and the whole coin aspect has got a very kind of 2013 altcoin vibe to it. Whereas the original intention that JR had when he did the fundraise was have a coin, which is like the root coin, which can transform into dollar coins, euro coins, S&P coins, etc. So Omni to that idea, and I'm going to get into how we're going to actually affect that and how rad it's going to be in a little bit. But yeah, after, so he put that in, and then he kind of stepped away. And then because I've adopted the idea, like I think the ticker OMNI as a 4-letter ticker is pretty cool. And I think the name works. So we all just stuck with the name Omni Layer, Omni Protocol. This week, between when this is recorded and when this goes live, we're going to coordinate with all of our exchanges so that it's rebranded at the spot exchanges, and we'll see the new ticker and the new name. And so I stepped up in a volunteer role as a board member on the foundation in April. So it's me, Craig, JR, and Anthony Vo, who's an early investor. Basically, they've given Craig executive authority to decide how vesting budget is spent. I've done the budget, which he's more or less approved, so there's subject to changes, but I've got several bounties out that I want to talk about. I want to get more people involved. We're doing a testing bounty program right now where people will be able to earn some modest amounts for a modest amount of time testing it out. We've had for the past week or two something that you might call, if you were not super cautious, which these guys are super cautious, a release candidate build, where you can actually download it on Windows, or you can install it in an Ubuntu command line server or whatever. And on Windows, it looks like Bitcoin QT, but you have balances for all these other things. So it's pretty exciting time.
So a long time ago, a long time ago in Bitcoin time, last year, we made with LTB Coin and then subsequently with my company Tokenly a decision to basically focus our Metacoin efforts on the counterparty protocol.
Yes.
Basically what it sounds like you're saying here is that you've reinvented the protocol and you've actually fixed many of the problems that were kind of outstanding with it. So let's talk about it from that perspective. At this point, where do you differ from counterparty, and what are the reasons why I, as somebody who's already doing stuff on counterparty, would want to switch or to use in addition, perhaps, Mastercoin for projects?
It's a great question. Yeah, well, I was doing a bit of research on this and looking into their stack, and I listened to Roddy do an interview yesterday, and highly impressed with what he has to say. He's definitely somebody who's technically sharp and sort of gets the overall thing. And the technology that they're building seems quite tremendous. So I have a lot of nice things to say about Counterparty. The cons that I would put out about Counterparty is that the feedback we've gotten from integrators is that the OmniCore D is easier to integrate because it's so congruous Bitcoin D. And the earlier version based on Mastercoin tools and Obelisk was more of a kludge, right? So people were complaining about that. People have had some difficulty with integrating Counterparty D. And then beyond having a more stable foundation technically, we're going to do some key features like the futures contracts and what I call decentralized banking, which I think is really important, and I want to get into a little more depth, directly at the protocol level, not as a VM, which is burning fuel to run, which has more complex moving parts that for an operational point of view may be maybe a bit riskier. And then for people who are just doing a token as like a crowd sale or as a tool for their accounts receivable, which I believe is the way that LTB Coin works, right? Is you take it for advertising and you pay it for content production and community participation. It makes sense to have some kind of meta level database, which could just be an SQL, or it could be one of these permission ledgers that are getting bandied about for financial institutions. And whatever protocol you want to have for making people whole if they lose keys, or associating payments with identities, which you may not want to do at all, but people can do that. And then you can issue your tokens across multiple protocols to get more liquidity. And also we're getting into a situation which is kind of a whole other topic, where we can have multi-blockchain and multi-protocol apps. And I think the last point that I want to make is the Counterparty guys are very focused on software engineering, and I think they're doing a pretty good job of that. But what we're doing here with Omni is going to involve more quantitative finance capability. So my work with the foundation's war chest of Omnis is going to do a systematic trading program where it's distributing orders throughout. There's going to be very tight spreads and liquidity on the decentralized exchange on day one when we go live. That's the deadline that I'm pushing towards right now. I've got a lot of deadlines on my plate. I do automated trading as my bread and butter occupation. So I'm also pushing out some systems just for trading and arbitraging Bitcoin. Like looking at, I was taking a look at Counterwallet yesterday, and I also have some usability knocks about Counterwallet. We can talk about web wallets versus desktop wallets in a bit. They don't have a whole lot of liquidity for the CP / whatever pair it is. Because they're not concerned about that. They want the community to create the liquidity in this kind of crowdsource. Markets are crowdsourcing mechanisms, right? So they're leaning on that. And the betting aspect is not standardized. So I have to go out and find a counterparty and say, let's bet half a Bitcoin that the Seahawks are going to win the Super Bowl or not, right? And that's a binary outcome. Or if we want to take a bet on the S&P 500, I have to find a counterparty for that, right? So the primary priority post-launch that I have and that I want to promote with a bounty of 4,000 or 5,000 Omnis, which right now is a low five-figure amount, could be a mid-five-figure amount, is building a standardized futures contract into the protocol so that it just works and there's a liquid market for it, and we're going to facilitate that.
Okay, so let's start breaking this down a little bit, because you said a lot of things there that I want to ask about. How much influence do you actually have on the project? Because I hear you saying that your expertise is in is in these commodity markets and contracts and things like that, and that Omni is pushing in that direction. And those are some of the criticisms that you leveled against Counterparty, which is fine. Is that the point of the project now? Has the project pivoted from what seemed to me to be a fairly generic meta platform, right, where you could do all of these things and it wasn't really specialized in any one direction? From what you've just described, it sounds like there is, at least in your mind, a greater focus on these financial tools, on these contracts, and kind of pushing in that direction. So have I gotten that right?
Yeah, I don't have unilateral sort of executive authority, but I do have a bit of pull.
And this is the direction the project as a whole is moving, though.
Well, if people want to take it in different directions, that's fine. I've published, or we're going to publish a set of bounties that I've drafted based on budget that we have of the vesting. There's like a 10% vesting that you get half the first year, half the second year. So I've laid out these bounties, and I'm trying to drive it in this direction. The competitive landscape has changed, right? Like, this was the first project, so at the time, the idea that it could do all these different things was pretty good. But now we've got something that can do all these different things, quote unquote, namely a Turing complete computation. And with that, you bring in some known unknowns, like what will the cost end up being relative to hosting on Amazon or DigitalOcean, and some other issues I think are a little too technical and out of scope here. But so yeah, I see that Symbionts and their former employers with Medici are focusing on securities, and that's good. That's a lot of money, right? Those are their clients for that. I'm personally very interested in securities, what this technology allows us to do for bringing like farm shares and real estate shares and renewable energy shares to the blockchain. It's way easier than having to like create an ETF and go through those centralized systems. And then you can do the Internet of Things and all that. So that's a whole direction. And I would like to see some of those securities and bring some of those securities to the platform. And as far as crowd sales go, people can do crowd sales with this. It's just a question of liquidity, right? So I think in order to win people back, right, because last year Counterparty got the lion's share of the crowd sales, right, and MadeSafe issued on Counterparty and so on. So they kind of won that one. So from what I understand, there's a tacit agreement with this other direction that I guess you could say we're pivoting a little bit, but we're not like changing anything fundamentally where you can't use securities. We're just not focusing on building a startup around smart contracts that enable what Symbiont guys call smart securities at this point in time. But if we nail the futures contract, we could become a very reliable platform for currency exchange and the decentralized banking model that I'm going to describe in a little bit. And so rather than trying to go get clients on Wall Street, I'm much more interested in getting clients in like Freetown, Sierra Leone, where the Wall Street, may not even be paved. Because I think that's where the most of the economic growth is going to come from in this world. And so I believe in that, like as an emoting person, Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does answer my question. Okay, so let's talk about the futures contract thing. What does that look like on the Omni blockchain? Why is that better than the alternatives that are around?
Yeah, so you can set something up using JavaScript, right? And you can prototype a fairly simple contract for difference contract. That's being redundant there. You can set up a pretty simple contract for difference in like 50 lines of JavaScript, right? Or however many lines of Solidity that you would need to do that. In order to standardize a futures contract or contract for difference, there's a little bit more work involved. And the real issue is settlement, right? So most futures contracts, whether you're trading on CME or you're trading on OKCoin or 796 or BitMax, they have a central clearinghouse standing behind all the trades. So, but also these contracts, the centralized ones today, don't allow you to take your realized profits off of the exchange until settlement, which is why they do weekly settlement, right? So there's the central backstop. In the early days of the CME, they almost went bust actually one day. and they had to like borrow some money, and they managed to hold it together. They haven't run into that danger so far. In 2008, the more you could say decentralized derivatives, where it's just banks setting up contracts with each other, that created a problem, right? And that's endemic, right? That's the decentralized clearing problem, and it's actually a very complex graph theory type problem. So you need somebody with sharp C++ skills, and if nobody steps up for the bounty, we may have some of the core developers that have worked on the decks step up and do this. But you need to go into the C++ code in OmniCore and extend the database to have an index of every trade that happens for a contract in a given series. And we also need to extend a transaction that builds on other transactions that we already have to basically create a contract series. So and then those contract series will have parameters. And so I want to create a contract for Bitcoin against the dollar, right? And I'm going to set the parameters as being that the notional value is $100 worth of Bitcoin, and the margin requirement is the equivalent of let's say I accept as my collateral Tether dollars, which is Craig Seller's startup, and they've worked with Bitfinex and they have a banking trust in Taiwan. So you have these dollars on the protocol now that are going to allow anybody who wants to come out and trade on the DEX to just do a withdrawal from their verified Bitfinex account to a wallet they control, and boom, they'll have dollars, right? So you bring your dollars to the table, you use 25 as your minimum margin, and let's say like 15 is the maintenance margin. So if you start losing and then it comes time to settle and you get below the maintenance, then you'll need to either put up more margin or close it out. You're getting leverage automatically, right? You don't need a banking license for somebody to create leverage for you. You just need this kind of contractual arrangement. And then you'll have a data feed, and you may be able to accept multiple data feeds and collate them together into an average and some formula. And each data feed will have a security parameter, which could be an SSL certificate, or in the case of like WebSocket feed, it would be WSS. Or it could be a cryptographic key associated with an address that's publishing. So you could have a URL as a text input with the cert next to it, and that could be like where you're getting one feed, and then you could have another feed which is a blockchain address and the like a PGP style key. So we want to support several of these and allow there to be innovation in that room. And there are a few startups that are trying to do data feeds that are Sybil proof and very robust.
Okay, so the futures contracts that I hear you talking about, as you said in the kind of earlier in your description, they're basically bets on a particular commodity or a particular type of market moving one way or the other. And so somebody bets one way and then somebody finds them on the other side and bets another. The protocol enables this and protects both the value that is escrowed or sequestered by both until a winner has been determined. And the winner is determined by what I would call trusted oracles. And basically, they are automated, unrelated, right? Neither betting party on either side controls what the data feed is putting out. And so it is a neutral source that can kind of be the arbiter of who has won this thing without actually having to involve somebody who has to come in and say, okay, well, I've decided that this person won because of these reasons. It's better if it's programmatic because it means that without human hands on it, so long as, the program isn't corrupted or there isn't anything wrong with the program, it will execute because there's no other choice.
Yeah. Now, when you mention a trusted oracle, what I was just saying about having different sources and different security parameters to verify them is we're leaving it somewhat open-ended for innovation in that regard, and also for people to do contracts that have multiple sources and take an average, for example.
Okay, so you are leaving, so the system is designed to use oracles just broadly, and people will differentiate their own oracles, right? I could make my bot into a better bot by making it so it has a cryptographic key by which it can certify that it is the actual thing, it's the actual oracle, and somebody isn't pretending to be that oracle. That's what you mean by security, right?
Yes, and if you were doing it in a really basic format, it might be the certificate to like okcoin.com to get from their futures contract, which is something we want to do. I want to do a BTC USD contract based on the exact same index as them, so that I can have an algo remarketing orders from one exchange to the other. and we can just kind of import. It's not so simple because you have the arbitrageur's balance sheet in the mix, but you put out orders on one exchange, somebody hits it, and then the bot takes an order on OKCoin, which has more liquidity, and in the process, we kind of import liquidity from one to the other. And honorable mention to a few startups. There's Reality Keys, which are trying to do these trusted Oracle basis for data feeds. And MirrorX is trying to do a futures contract based off of Bitcoin B. And I believe their current focus on their business model is to be that information clearinghouse, to be kind of like Bloomberg for crypto. We're not trying to be Bloomberg for crypto. We have, I recognize there's a whole field of innovation there, so we're trying to leave that open. And then the other key parameter that'll go into this, stepping over to the single thing, is the settlement. So the default settlement is, if you take a loss, you can obviously move your money as you please. But if you make a gain, basically you've traded. I'm Mr. A, and I took a bet with Mr. B, and then things changed. Mr. B's bet was in the red and mine's in the green. And then I sold that contract, let's say, to Mr. C, who is taking a separate bet. So until settlement happens, to net out the monies between these three parties is most simply left to, at this block, the contract expires, and it looks through the index and it generates a series of transactions that everybody is paying up or getting paid what the contract position implies. Now you could input a function as that parameter, which is more robust, and it goes through the index like once a block or once every 10 blocks, and settles chains of people who have based on who is taking a realized loss, right? Because their capital is then freed up to go settle other people, and that gets incredibly complex, and it's a field of research and development that other people can get into, or that I may take a whack at. So then you can have futures contracts that are, you can take your profits and eat them too, without having to wait till the end of the week. But looking at like the OKCoin futures, we've seen the volume in the Bitcoin markets declining, and OKCoin, of course, wasn't making a fee off of their volume, which used to be like 1 million Bitcoins spot traded, and back when Bitcoin was more expensive, right? And they managed to migrate over to this futures contract business model where they're taking 3 basis points out of half the volumes for contracts opening. And it's worked pretty well for them with the weekly settlement. So I'm not like, that was a really hard R&D problem I was chipping away at, and then I was like, maybe this can be deferred to the future. You don't necessarily need it to get the desired effects. So beyond opening up a financial supermarket on blockchain where people can start margining native blockchain assets, which in this case would be the Omni token. And we may expand that. We may allow people to use as collateral Tether dollars, or gold tokens that people are vaulting gold and they've issued those. I think that since this is an open source protocol tool that we're pertaining to build on top of the DEX that we're about to launch here, people should be able to do a lot of things with it. But the Omni is going to be usable as collateral, and so in addition to taking bets, in addition to a guy from Malaysia who doesn't have, can't qualify for like an interactive broker's account, right? But he can do spreads on the S&P 500 versus gold, or he can trade his own home currency, right? Or potentially somebody in the United States who has a self-directed IRA could move all of their funds and 401k as well. They can move their funds out of the U.S. system to some extent. Depends on how much of a libertarian they are. They want to go full money with it, or maybe just make it a fraction of it. But they could replicate a lot of the exposures that they have now with ETFs using decentralized exchange.
But all of this, of course, presumes that they are able to find counterparties who are willing to take the other side of the bet that they want to make.
Right. So that's like a really important point, and that's where people are not quite jumping on it. And it's not so easy, but there is some mathematics where, given a certain amount of capital and the right distribution of orders and an arbitrage model, you can kind of bootstrap liquidity, but it does take some capital plus some quantitative algo trading to create the spread in the first place for somebody who isn't a quant to come out and say, yeah, I just want to get long gold, with this futures contract.
Okay, and so what you're saying, let me just parse that for a second. So what you're saying there is that even in the initial stages where there's a low liquidity environment, people who are using the system because it's new, the saying that liquidity will be provided to the market by algorithmic trading and some essentially seed capital that goes in. So you're going to try and kickstart the process and have buying and selling available, not necessarily by people. Those will hopefully come in and trade with the bots, but the bots will be there as kind of as a first buyer or first buyer seller.
Yeah, and that's like principally my job is to program that. Yeah. So and that's what I do. That's what I do in my day-to-day business. Is I have a bot arbitraging OKCoin and Huobi spot, and then a bot arbitraging the OKCoin futures. And I'm getting into BitMax pretty soon because BitMax has pretty low liquidity, but I figure there's some good arbitrages on that. So that'll be kind of an interesting case study for me, and this even more so because here we're doing it from scratch, and the foundation has a pretty big supply of Omni, which means two things, which are pretty good for people who get involved. One is it's a very closely held supply of Omni. So if you come in at this current like $1 million and some change market cap, you're not going to get dumped on. There's no whale that's going to cynically try to take your $500 away from you by just dumping the coin. And two, it means that we have a lot of supply to provide liquidity. So rather than thinking, wouldn't it be great if Omni went back to like 10 bit cents and we could just dump it, we're definitely not in that direction. Thinking about ways to make money over time off of that supply by making spreads, and also by getting decentralized banking yields. And I'm afraid I'm a little excited to talk about that. So maybe but hit me with any other.
Well, yeah, let me just I have one more clarifying question about what we're talking about here. This goes back a little ways. So when you were talking about essentially setting up a second, the thing that I didn't understand is when you were giving the Mr. A, Mr. B, Mr. C example. So if I'm Mr. B, can I sell my interest in the bet with Mr. A to Mr. C, or do I need to make a separate bet with Mr. C that effectively hedges me against the losses of the original bet with Mr. A? So am I selling my interest in the first bet, or am I creating a second layered bet on top?
Right. Well, it depends. So if you were Mr. A and no, but in this case, wait, I'm Mr. A, right? I'm the guy who bought the contract and then sold it to Mr. C. So yeah, like from the index's point of view, every trade is like a separate deal. But where we're building off of the really strong foundation of spot DEX trading is like the only difference between the futures contract and other smart property is that it's an unsigned integer, and that when it's on your address, you have whatever the margin requirement is locked up as reserve capital, which isn't recognized by the protocol, so you can't send it and thus lose a lot of your bet. And therefore you get this really hard capitalization. So yeah, that's the academic problem in settlement, is that there is some small probability that I may net out. I may do a trade with somebody that brings my the absolute value of my contract balance, whether it's -1 or +1, brings it to a lower absolute value, and thus frees capital up and creates a netting trade. It creates an event, right, that should net somebody money at settlement. There's some small probability that it may be the exact same guy, right, which is just relatively simple. It's like, okay, I lost by, but in a liquid market, the odds of that become diminishingly small in this square root function as the number of participants grows, which is why that's kind of a fun R&D problem. And I don't know if the market will demand it. I think weekly settlement is like pretty brisk, and there are also 24-hour contracts that like BitMEX is trying out, and that kind of solves the problem in an easy way, because if you want to wait, you don't have to wait too long to get your winnings out.
Okay, so let's change gears here, or not change gears. Let's move on to the next topic that you mentioned in that first early barrage, decentralized banking at the protocol level. And actually, before we get into this, I have a kind of technical question that I just want to understand. My understanding is that Mastercoin was a UTXO-based colored coin system and was not an account system. Is that correct?
No. Where meta layer protocols are arguably superior to the colored coin protocol, and Vitalik Buterin's actually made this point. So for whatever credibility he has, which I think he has a fair bit, so I'm going to lean on his credibility. When you send a colored coin, you're sending a specific little small amount of Bitcoin, and it has to be a specific amount. Whereas when you send a transaction in a counterparty or in Omni layer, you send a dust, but the data that defines the transaction isn't the dust. That's just getting around the spam limit in Bitcoin. It's the unspent transaction data that is encoded.
As you said, there are two basic approaches that can be taken. You can either use the colored coin approach, where you take little tiny pieces of Bitcoin, little tiny unspent transaction outputs, or UTXOs, as you said. And if I wanted to send you, 500 Atom coins and 500 Atom coins, I have one UTXO that represents 500 Atom coins. Then I can send that to you, and it's that specific little tiny chunk of Bitcoin being tracked through the entire thing that in a colored coin system is the actual token value that I am sending to you. Whereas in an account system, like we have with Counterparty or like with Omni, you are not so much giving somebody cash, right? Where like you can't change what form the cash is. You can't, randomly exchange it for another dollar bill or whatever. It's the cash that is handed to you is actually the cash that you possess. Whereas with these account-based systems like Counterparty and Omni, it's really more like I'm handing you a check. And then at the point that you cash that check, then it withdraws it from my account, and the account is owned by a public Bitcoin address. And then it assigns it to your public Bitcoin address. But there's no changing hands here. It's just like change order, moving it from my account to your account.
Right. Put it another way, if you wire $1 million to your Bitfinex account, which would have to be verified, and then you do a tether withdrawal, and you better do it to an address where you control the private key, then Bitfinex, which is integrated this software, will send a transaction for a small amount of Bitcoin to that address. And on the Omni protocol, your balance will show 1 million Tether dollars on that address. Now, if you take that small Bitcoin balance, which you probably need a little more for the fees to do anything with the balance, but just for the sake of argument, if you take that small Bitcoin balance, and let's say you had a little bit more to cover the fee, and you just sent that Bitcoin anywhere else in the world, like as a Bitcoin transaction, then you still have $1 million on the Tether address, in Tether on that address. Because from the Omni protocol's point of view, it's parsing that transaction data, not the Bitcoin itself. That's the difference between a meta layer protocol and colored coins.
So another way to describe this is it's, the Bitcoin effectively acts like a stamped envelope that is wrapped around whatever it contains. So it doesn't matter how big it is. It's just a flat. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And it's kind of the same price as a stamp as well. It's like 2 cents worth of Bitcoin, right? So I like that metaphor.
Counterparty also works this way. One of the intricacies that we have discovered in working with Counterparty over the last year is that this can lead to having essentially bad checks, because the protocol, if I send out a bunch of different transactions, well, the Bitcoin transaction part is valid, but whether or not there's going to be enough balance after, all of these different ones that went out in the same block have been cached is a different matter. And in practice, what we see is that you'll send 50,000 of a token, but if the balance has been sent somewhere else, then they receive the Bitcoin, but the balance of whatever the token they're supposed to receive winds up being zero. You mentioned in the last segment, or in the last conversation, that the Omni protocol can effectively escrow this value. And I'm curious how it is that you are escrowing this value, because that is definitely something you cannot do in Counterparty at this time.
Well, I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappoint a little bit. I think this is a question best left for Zathras, because we've been trying to build something that is extremely rigorous in this regard. But I remember a conversation from last week about documentation for integrators on their best practices. And like, as a rule, if you're an exchange, for example, and you're accepting Tether, you should wait more than one confirmation before accepting that, because there can be orphan blocks and other limitations of the Bitcoin protocol. But yeah, the nuts and bolts stuff about the atomic transactions, I think is best left for an AMA. I wish I could dig into that more.
That's fine. So that's fine. We'll dig into it more with him. But am I correct in that I thought I heard you say that that is something that you can actually do with the Omni protocol? Is that these are account, it's not a colored coin style system, it's an account style system. And that in order to do many of these things you're talking about here, you effectively have to escrow these values. And so, even if you can't explain it, you guys have a solution for this?
Yeah, so when you generate a transaction right now, it shows you like the dust transaction, and it shows you a transaction to the Exodus address where it originally came, and for the DEX, that'll be where the fees go, and I'll get to that. The fees are going to be real low, and then yeah, I think there's a multi-sig escrow involved, even in simple sense. So yeah, like robust security for these basic things is basically the objective that we've been focusing on at the root level. And also for the decentralized exchange transactions, you have a multi-sig escrow involved. And I wanted to, before we were doing multi-sig escrow in a way that is relatively loady for data footprint that it leaves on the blockchain. But we've implemented a pay-to-store hash version of how the transactions work. So we're not polluting the blockchain with more data than is necessary.
Okay, so let's jump back to decentralized banking. So I assume that this also kind of ties in with that. So when you talk about decentralized banking, what you are effectively saying is that there is no, Atoms Bank entity where you have an account with, and it uses the Mastercoin protocol and it's, saving stuff for you in this way. You're actually talking about banking where the blockchain itself or the counterparty, or the Omni protocol acts explicitly as the counterparty, as the bank in this circumstance. Is that right?
That's where we want to go. So I'm working on a prototype right now, which I'm not going to have a general public consumption, but more as a proof of concept that just uses Bitcoin D and the Omni protocol for issuing the pegged currency and the OKCoin account that I control. So it's not, it's not for the general public to pile a bunch of money into it. And I'm trying to get this together for a conference next week to show it to some banking executives. So that should be interesting. But the basic is taking assets and then issuing currency against them, and hoping it all sort of works out, right? And we've seen in like negative interest rates in Europe and quantitative easing and all of this stuff, that this system is kind of reaching a moment of truth. It's reaching its limits of growth, and there's a big aspect of international trade that originally it was called euro dollars, where their banks are creating dollars synthetically at an international level, and then using things like euro dollar futures for the interest rate that people might expect to get, or currency swaps for the exposure to dollars versus something else to hedge these things. So basically, like, you can create currency as long as you have an asset and a hedge to protect the value of that asset, right? And like the assets that bankers use are debt assets, right? They're promises of future payments, right? So it's worked as long as the population has been growing and the energy supply has been growing, and there's all these new markets. Let's go pound capitalism into them with our derivatives. And that was the 21st century, and it worked kind of well. I mean, there were a lot of atrocities, but hey, now it's the 21st century, right? And we need a new form of money, and we need something that's more robust. And also, wouldn't it be nice if people could actually own their money again, instead of having their money legally just being a liability of a bank, right? So decentralized banking is you have an asset on the blockchain, like Bitcoin, and you hedge it with a smart contract. So instead of having counterparty risk with Deutsche Bank, or whatever, you have no counterparty risk. Your counterparty has their capital locked up on the blockchain as well, and it's all going to be sorted out through multi-sig escrow logics. So once you've got, let's say, 100 Omni, and let's say there's an Omni Bitcoin contract that's trading at like $3 today, right? Like 900 Omni, short sell 100 Omni worth of contracts. And let's say I do that at a slight premium. Like we see this in OKCoin, it's pretty liquid, since that's where like a lot of the volume is today. When China devalued last week, the premium disappeared because of the way there's some weirdness in the way the index settled. But there's premium again, so you can take a Bitcoin and you can have it mostly on the blockchain. You just have a fraction with OKCoin. You could short sell one Bitcoin worth of contracts, and you're selling it at like a maybe 1% higher than what the index is. So in a week, you'll know that whether you have more or less Bitcoin when the contract settles, the dollar value will be $263 or $62, whatever it's trading at right now. Right? So taking the same thing at Omni, if I buy my Omni at $3 spot, and then I put it up in this escrow, and I short it at $3.03 for a weekly contract, I'm getting a 1% weekly yield, right? And we're in a world right now where people are paying negative interest rates to get into government bonds, and even Nestle in Switzerland, they had a negative yield on their corporate bond. Those bonds have sold off since then, but maybe we'll see again. The point is, you can't retire on $1 million because you're going to be living like a college student with the income you get. Whereas speculators who want leveraged exposure to these assets, because of course, as this catches on, these assets, whether it's Omni or Ether or Bitcoin, are going to grow in market cap to accommodate all this capital, right? So it kind of makes sense for them. And also, they can take a quick trade. They don't have to worry too much about the cost to carry if they're nimble traders. And there's enough demand for that we've seen very high premiums in the Bitcoin contracts. So I believe this is something that makes sense generally, and makes sense for the price of gold, and makes sense for the price of a lot of commodities. And we also see these contract premiums where there's like a time value, right? If you're a farmer and you sell your corn in December and it's March, right? Like farmer, you don't have $1 million in the bank. You got $1 million, quote unquote, of value in your farm, and you're leaning on that because you're going to produce a bunch of corn. So you got this time value between now and when you harvest at the end of the year, right? So most futures markets have this contract premium. If you hedge with those contracts, then you can expect what's called a roll yield, where you keep selling these contracts at a higher price than the present value, and they settle at whatever the present value is at that moment, and you roll it a little bit higher. So we're going to have a system eventually built into the protocol level. I'm working on an ugly prototype right now, and I'm eventually going to want to have deposit insurance, so that there's a way for people to give up a little bit of the yield they're getting and have this one-to-one redemption guarantee. And I want to do that as a DAC. I don't know if I should get too deep into that here, but the basic idea is that you'll be able to take your Omni, or potentially your Tether dollars, which are like kind of old school banking system connected dollars, and start getting yield on blockchain. And the result is you get these decentralized dollar coins that you can use to pay anybody in the world with. And when you hold them, you're getting a yield based on what this contract difference is. So I think it's potentially a big deal. Like it's a big deal for people who have money, because hey, it's something that I can get a safe yield in. And it really is, like, we can do it right so that it's safer than anything, that it's safer than having quote unquote money in the bank, which isn't really in the bank. It's just the liability of the banks. It's safer than having cash in your home. It's safer than a lot of things, and I would even like at some point to have insurance contracts that are multi-blockchain, so that even if the Bitcoin blockchain gets whacked, you can get your dollars redeemed. Maybe might be a big disaster. Maybe you don't get 100% on the dollar, but you get them redeemed on the Ether blockchain, or vice versa. If the Ether blockchain goes down, you get the dollars on the Bitcoin blockchain. So for the foundation, with our basis of capital in Omni, a big thing that we're going to be doing is using that Omni to margin contracts so that provide liquidity, as I was saying. And then in the process, like if we're shorting our Omni against Bitcoin, we could have like synthetic Bitcoin that gets like a pretty low yield, but it's pegged to Bitcoin. We expect Bitcoin to be decent. Or you short sell it against the dollar, and we create these dollar coins. And I think the biggest thing for this is people in Africa and India and Latin America suffer from very poor banking services and also very poor currencies, and their economic vitality is limited. I've lived in Argentina for a while, so I've been dealing with this directly. I can get into all. I think that's like a bigger topic. But yeah, the mechanics of decentralized banking is that like money isn't a mystery. You have an asset that's worth X. You enter into a contract to sell it in the future at X plus Y%, and you've got that many dollars yielding Y%. That's decentralized banking.
Okay, so there are a couple of things here. One, the way that you're defining decentralized banking is very contrary to how I would personally define it. But I have a suspicion that this kind of ties in with point two, which is that it sounds like all of the stuff that we've talked about here and all of the stuff that you're working on and are excited about are things that are really personal problems to you, where you're frustrated with the status quo of how things are, and you see this as providing kind of the tools for a better way to accomplish the things that you want to accomplish anyways. Decentralized banking, the way that you defined it there, sounds a whole lot more to me like maybe what banking used to be, but in my lifetime, I've never received any sort of percentage beyond like 0.5 or whatever, per year, for actually having money in a bank. So what you're talking about is really more of like a savings account or like a longer term, like a vaulting contract or something like that.
Yeah, or like money market accounts, right? So the way that banks that have lent people mortgage money and all this stuff, so they don't have that coming in on demand, the way that they can always satisfy like an ATM withdrawal is what's called the repo market. And the repo market takes collateral like treasury bonds or possibly blue chip stocks, and you agree that I'm going to give you this and I'm going to buy it back from you in the future. That's a reverse repo. If you do it the other way, then it would be you're going to buy it back from me in the future at a higher price, right? And in this process, they're able to create dollar units that can then net out other things in the banking system. So that's like the Uber short-term money, and that's a derivatives contract, right? And the what we saw in 2008 was that whereas like the conventional idea of banking is that the bank takes in deposits and they lend it out to people, but since the 80s there's been this kind of steroid money creation going on. And what happened in 2008 was that like kind of IV drip mechanism failed. Money market accounts were not redeeming at par value; they went below $1, and people were afraid to engage in counterparty risk for even the basic on-demand money creation and unwinding that the economy depends on. Trade stops, all of these things. So we're going to have to so I see what you're saying, that this comes from my personal experience, and it does, I'm a person and I've been working on this for about a year now. But it's not just my problems, it's also everybody in Argentina who wants to be wealthy in the future's problem, and it's everybody in Africa who they're not able to do commerce because the costs are higher than their profit margins, or they don't have enough capital to even qualify to open an account. And eventually it's going to be the problems of central bankers and banking executives, because they're going to be looking at deteriorating currencies or deteriorating balance sheets. So I believe whether people are doing it through Blythe Master's Hyperledger product, which looks pretty cool, and I want to play with their APIs and stuff. I'm not like building on that at this moment, but I'm open to it. I'm not like a priori permission ledger. So things probably go to her. then the bank can do clearing of whatever assets you want to do, and maybe those assets will be debt assets, or maybe they'll be gold deposits, right? Like you've heard about the Chinese accumulating gold. So it seems to me that having no counterparty risk and owning your money is something people are going to want to do, and getting a better return on your savings is something people are going to want to do. And this is the old chestnut that people have been being a drum about in Bitcoin, is lower transaction fees and less restriction on transactions. So to me, there's no contest, but maybe like I'm talking my book here, right?
Today's episode of Let's Talk Bitcoin is brought to you by Tokenly and GetKeepKey.com. This track is called Thought Partner from my favorite instrumental composer, General Fuzz, at generalfuzz.net. I usually talk over these tracks, but today let's take a break from talking and listen together. I'll be back in a few minutes with the magic word. The magic word for today's episode of Let's Talk Bitcoin is fuzz. That's F-U-Z-Z. Fuzz. You've got until the 15th of September to visit letstalkbitcoin.com or the Let's Talk Bitcoin iOS app to enter it for your share of the listener awards. Let's rejoin Patrick now.
Yeah, I've been living in Argentina. So I've got kids there. The way I got into Bitcoin involved me flying to Argentina because it was cheaper than using Zoom to get the money there, and I wanted to see my kids, and I went out to the hood with $1,000 in cash and to see my daughter, and then I got robbed at gunpoint by some dudes. Yeah. So the only money I had, this was like 2013, the only money I had control of were 5 Bitcoins, and I sold them at right at the low, like $80 a Bitcoin, but I got cash for it, and I was like, it saved my life, and that's when it clicked for me, like how significant this all is. And I was sitting in a sort of hostile type situation when I got on with the Mastercoin people, actually. And like in Argentina, you've got to basically, if you want to bring money in internationally, you've got to find a guy to sell Bitcoin to, right? And there's a dollar bond swap where people buy bonds in dollars and they sell it in pesos, which is kind of like buying in dollars and selling in pesos, but it's more legal. And they're getting into the next phase of their currency crisis now. Like, they periodically manipulate it lower, and those bond swaps are being like antagonized by the government. So now it's like people must use Bitcoin to move money. And in Argentina, they have a lot of dollars. They have over $100 billion in cash. And I think they might want to get some yield on it. So I do have some friends there with whom I will be partnering to promote the decentralized exchange and the decentralized banking, and it could potentially catch on massively. And then I've been working with some folks in Africa for about 8 months now, particularly Mustafa Cole in Sierra Leone, with the Sierra Leone Liberty Group. I'm planning on helping him raise some money through with the help of the Conscious Entrepreneurship Foundation. So they have a nonprofit, a 501c nonprofit in the United States, so people can buy these impact bonds that we're going to issue on OmniLayer and get a tax deduction if they're a corporation or Schedule C. And then those impact bonds are going to pay back GDP dollars that we derive from measuring how much economic activity Mustafa is able to generate with that base of capital. And we're going to put that base of capital. So like, I want to get him like $10,000, but I'm not just going to like we're not just like going to give him $10,000. It's going to be like an endowment that is debanked and is getting some income. And I think given the current yields I'm seeing with the futures, it might be like $600, $700 a month, which is an operating budget that he can actually work with. And then he can use some of the capital to trade with some of these import-export, right? So that automatically is going to take very high costs of moving capital in Sierra Leone down. And from that base of generating like a small percentage yield off of capital by trading it for cash and then back into crypto, you can build, and you can start getting merchants. So where we're going with the foundation is to increasingly, as the Mastercoin price goes up, as the Omni price goes up, we're going to divest a little bit more into these dollar deposits and use the yield as a budget to endow people like Mustafa, people like Ala in Botswana. I know a young entrepreneur who's moved to Bangalore. So I've got like a pretty good network internationally to make inroads in these places. And, we're going to do it not as an investment. We're doing it as like an endowment. But the knock-on effect is that we get more people involved in the ecosystem. And everybody else in the game, whether you're Blythe Masters, you're right in the middle of Wall Street, or you're Ethereum and you're in Switzerland and you're looking at maybe helping people underwrite bonds, or you're Symbiont and you want to plug into Wall Street at some level, but maybe more on the fringes. We're taking it in this system D direction, basically. And I feel pretty good about that, and I'm very excited about that. That's actually, like, for me, that's the best part, more than, like, all of my incentives here are delimited to capital gains and arbitrage profits that I make in trading. And I'm giving away the debanking thing as like a nonprofit freedom of speech exercise, because I believe that's the best way to go about it. And ultimately, I just really want to see like $1 billion of GDP get added to the Sierra Leone economy. Like that's my profit. Like, ultimately, I want to make some money. Like, I want to make maybe a few $1 million, but I don't want to make like billions of dollars. Like, I want that money to be widely distributed and have a better world, a better economy to live in.
And you think that future can be delivered by the Mastercoin project, or by the Omni project, as you're assisting it along in these developments and helping to connect those dots?
Yeah, I do, and but obviously I do because I'm here promoting it, right? so maybe that's disingenuous, but
there's nothing wrong with profit motive. There is the appearance that there is something wrong when people say that they don't have a profit motive, because it means that either you're a magical person that doesn't exist in most of life, or you're lying and just actually have a profit motive, but feel like people will like you less if you say it.
Yeah, so we at the foundation do have a profit motive. The profit motive is in the overall growth of the ecosystem for either the gains and the Omni price and or the yields that Omni can produce in the system that I'm describing. But all of the capital that's in the foundation is going to like, we may have some expenditures for travel and things, and I don't want to fully back myself in a corner. It may come to a point where I might take a salary, but I'm keep it like relatively low. But I'm trying to put everything on the back, and make the profit motive aspect like pretty clean and fully aligned, as opposed to like a public company executive who's got a lot of stock options and he cashes them out and they do a secondary. Like there are ways that things can fray. So I'm trying to lay it out that our profit motives are real, like anybody else, and and potentially very high. But that endowment, like if Omni goes to $100 and we're managing money in the millions and millions of dollars, what we're going to do primarily with that is start spending millions of dollars on international organizations that are promoting crypto economics. And then, for the technical people out there that like hard data, the goal here is to do a D app that can parse activity from marked addresses belonging to these organizations and actually quantify how much they're doing, right? Not only for their gross revenue so they can continue as an organization, but also how much activity they're creating. So people will be able to put in $1 to the Sierra Leone Liberty Group, for example, and then see that buck generated 15 cents of GDP growth over the following 6 months, for example. So I'm a big, I have a lot of scrutiny on international development. I think international development has failed by and large. Most experts in international development tend to agree with that. Whereas like we've seen amazing data from just giving people cash, right? That's basic income. And in a way, like decentralized banking is basic income for people who have money, which of course doesn't automatically solve things. But if we can give money to these organizations and they can get some basic income off of it, then they can find useful money saving trades for people to do, or money investing trades for people to do, and galvanize the international connectivity in places like Sierra Leone or Botswana, or like in India. It's a really big opportunity because they're just starting to get into e-commerce, right? They're just starting to get $30 smartphones in their hands at a widespread level, and have this higher level connectivity. And then I want to mention another startup that we are kind of partnered with, BitSim. They have a really cool SIM chip technology that you can overlay, and you can have hardware level security for Bitcoin or for Omni layer balances. So your decentralized dollars could be on your phone, and it doesn't cost a whole lot to get into that. These organizations could probably import them at like an $8 FOB price and then sell them at like, $12 or $10, which is, still like a thing. If your country's per capita GDP is $600 a year, $1,200 purchasing power parity adjusted, $12 is something, but it's affordable enough that, for what that value is, right? As opposed to like paying fees on a bank account, right, every month. So that's where we're trying to go with this. That's a strategy. System D, help the people.
If it takes you guys a year to hit the types of usage cases that you want, because I mean, it seems like certainly you guys are about to release a product into testing that we'll be able to get our hands on and really actually, see what we think relative to other products. But I mean, adoption takes a while. So I guess the question I'm asking here is that in a year from now, if you guys, are just then starting to kind of actually catch the traction that you're hoping that you're going to get with this, if it takes a year to get from here to there, is the project still a going concern at that point, or is the lack of funding actually a problem?
No, I think we're pretty good because, I do things to support myself, and Craig's got, he's got Tether going on, and
Okay, so this is like the protocol is almost kind of like a side project for you guys, and you all have your other main things, and that's where you're making the money, and the protocol is just kind of the enabling layer that gets you there.
Yeah, well, like Sean works with rivets, and that kind of ties in nicely because we can use their firmware for his Bitcoin, for his Omni J, so you can have really hard security on those. Yeah, Zathras has actually turned down job offers, and Zathras has really been trucking along with Dex on delivering the decentralized exchange. So, what will Zathras do after this? Well, I don't know. Like, I'll have to ask him. But as far as the foundation goes, like, we've got a solid enough product now, and we've got a pretty good positioning financially for running it. And the better it gets, the more money we'll be able to put back into promotion and let it be. Think of it like this isn't like a startup where we're burning cash and we need more money to buy catered lunch for everybody. It's more like it's not like a decentralized autonomous organization. It's more autonomous, but it's going to become more autonomous over time. And the funding aspect is all pretty much bootstrapped. So some might hear that and think bearish, but I don't know. I think it makes us hungry enough and lean enough that we're gonna be getting a better return on our investment as we put capital into different organizations or as we put capital into market making.
So it sounds like one of the primary things that you are spending funds on, in whatever type of sense we want to talk about that, is with these bounties. And I remember the way that Mastercoin originally did bounties was something that they called role-based bounties, which was kind of like a monthly salary plus performance incentives. Is that how you're doing these current bounties? And if not, how are you doing these current bounties?
No, we're doing them like a little open. We're going to publish very soon the requirement documents for them. So there are a series of steps that you'll have to satisfy to get the bounty. And one of the basic requirements is that everything be open source because it's an open. So that means that there's like a central GitHub repository to branch off of. And if anybody else is working on it, you'll be able to see what they're doing and coordinate with them if you want, or just kind of beat them to the punch if you're not. So the other bounties that we're going to offer are hard coding the debanking at the protocol level rather than having it be an application layer thing. Doing the multi-sig escrow that we have for the decentralized exchange to apply for commerce. So if you're waiting for delivery, instead of like the trade clearing from the escrow when you buy the limit order, it's like you're buying something from Amazon or from your local farmer and they deliver it and you sign off on that. So those are both a few thousand. And let's see, we've got a mobile app and we've actually got a startup team that's already working on that. So right now they're doing it as a client server thing, just as a prototype. And their next step is to do an HD wallet that's based on OmniJ and creates peer-to-peer transactions. But other people can step up and try to compete with that as well. So I've picked these bounties out because I believe that they are the most fundamental aspects of success. But I do want to emphasize that the product we have now is a desktop client that's based on Bitcoin, so you can have private key custody at the level that you would want. We've got multi-sig support. We've got Armory support, so you can have a cold wallet, and we're going to have the liquidity support. So if you come in and test now, spend a little bit of time, you can get some pretty easy omnis to whet your appetite, and then if you want to dump them, you can dump them. If you want to double up your position, then you can do that. Depends on what your impressions are. And the time is now. Like, we're trying to launch this thing as soon as possible. We've already opened the bounties by the time this goes live in some exchanges and among our community that's been following this. So better hurry up and do some tests. We'll include links to the test suite that you can run through to earn these fractions of an omni for like a minute each. And all these sort of documentation that you would need for that to install it. I mean, like the Bitcoin QT is pretty easy. Just download it, double click, and and open it up.
One of the reasons why I have not been really screaming for a desktop client for Counterparty or really any of these meta platforms is because it requires a pretty heavy re-indexing, and it just so that still is there on the desktop client then.
Yeah, that's a caveat. So what I'd like to see come out of the mobile bounty is that people can have an Android app that partially nodes whatever balances you have, but doesn't have to get 30 gigabytes down, because that obviously won't work on mobile. But yeah, we're not quite there yet as far as like the perfection. If people don't want to reindex, they can use Omni Wallet, which is the web wallet that we've got, and it's also supported by Holy Transaction, and then there are, of course, quite a few exchanges that have already integrated.
What's the Omni Wallet domain? I actually have used that one before. I can't recall if it's a .com or a .net though, and I actually did find it in the last couple of weeks to be pretty useful.
Yeah, omniwallet.org is the web wallet, and they're about to come out with a new one that has a new coat of paint and some better UI design and more efficient refactoring of it. And omnilayer.org is the organization website. And my critique about Counterwallet, like I actually lost some money on Doge Party, because Counterwallet generates this pre-designed like poem key for you. And yeah, in Omni Wallet you get a user ID, and you write a password like the way that you would encrypt your Bitcoin QT wallet. So I like that better because I can remember my password, and it salts the hash, and thus my key is memorable string. Whereas I like deleted a file in Google Drafts. I lost access to my Doge Party. So as far as usability goes, I have a bias from that $150 or so that I burned towards Omni Wallet. And I did have a scare once with Omni Wallet like a year and a half ago, and I had to run a little conversion function in the JavaScript emulator in my browser with my password in order to get the key out of it, and then I imported that into a native wallet. So the Omni Wallet is kind of like blockchain in the sense that you generate the key, and for that contingency that I just described, like you can recover it if you forget the hash that they give you, the unique ID. I'm still looking into a wallet provider that will integrate. I like Green Address. I was just doing a little shopping yesterday, so still a little bit of biz dev to do on that regard. I really like this wallet that takes an email address and aliases it, while still having control of the private key. No private keys on some server. That's not. Well, it's money transmission, first of all. So Green Address seems to satisfy that. So if we get them to integrate, that would be my ideal. But in the meantime, Omni Wallet's really solid, and then of course you can have the desktop.
So I used to just be a journalist, but in this day and age, I'm also running a company called Tokenly, and we are currently building on Counterparty, but the goal isn't to be Counterparty, like a Counterparty application or anything like that. It's to kind of be a bridging layer that connects these different meta protocol platforms underneath. So my ears kind of perked up when you said earlier in the interview that you guys are thinking about multi-protocol / multi-blockchain applications. And I was wondering if, as kind of the lead out, you can explain or at least give a very brief overview of what something like that would look like and what exactly you meant by multi-protocol. Is it easier to integrate Omni into something else, or are you saying that Omni can incorporate other things?
Well, so since you mentioned that, I'll take the plug. We have gotten feedback from integrators that Omni Core is easier to integrate. Like for instance, Bitfinex is already integrated. So if we do like the futures contracts that I described, it would be fairly trivial for them to jump over. So that's a plus in its favor. But getting back to the core question, there has already been some initial coordination between Craig and Vitalik about having blocknet fungibility between OmniLayer properties and Ether properties. Blocknet is like sort of a meta decentralized exchange, an asset in one blockchain against the other, and to clear the escrow, I guess you have to parse the other blockchain. So that's for like basic fungibility purposes. But then from an application point of view, we're still pretty early in the game when it comes to smart contracts and apps. So I was playing with the Ethereum command line the other week so I could get my ethers out, right? So it was like, oh man, there's this crazy price movement. I gotta like learn this real quick so I can like troubleshoot it, you know. So it's not bad tech. I really like it actually. Geth is really cool. I can run a JavaScript emulator and define and I'm a Node developer these days, so I like that. And I can imagine doing a lot with it, right? At the cost of both having an Ether budget, which is kind of like your monthly hosting bill, or and also the cost of some dealing with some technical complexity that maybe doesn't strictly have to do with my application, right? And then in Counterparty's case, they forked the Python version of that, and so instead of spending ethers, you'll spend XCPs to run your DFs in that way. So I'm looking at what I can do right now just with some node logic executing through existing distributed protocols. So I'm learning Docker, so where you can do containers, and I'm looking at injecting Node into a container on a user side in order to have a decentralized app that doesn't use any protocols necessarily. It's just using like IT, right? And then then maybe there's some security issues with that. So that's something that people haven't really delved into. If you're comfortable having a central server or a cluster of servers that you own, like you're a legal company, that's not a fully distributed application, but there's a lot that you can do right now in terms of issuance and in terms of dynamically redeeming and issuing coins. And Omni facilitates that today, right? So when I do this decentralized banking program, I've got this Python code they wrote. I installed a node packet that takes Python wrappers. I don't install the Python requirements. And then I use that Python wrapper in my node code to make some calls. They've got like a handful of, they've got about 8 transactions that are native to Omni, and then all the Bitcoin D transactions as well. So that's pretty good, but it's not like a fully autonomous corporation, right? So what I'm looking forward to doing in the next 6 months or so with deposit insurance as like a decentralized deposit insurance corporation, I want to do it multi-blockchain, right? So I'm looking at Ethereum and I'm looking at Tau chains, and Tau chains is sort of the darling of the team as far as that direction goes, because what they're doing is instead of executing so much code in a given block, guaranteed, but having to spend some token on it in order as to decentivize like halting attacks on the network. What they do is they have this like tautological code where like the code itself is proven to have a certain function, and it might take n blocks to execute it. If you like have to break it up, so you can't guarantee that, but it's also token free. So we're going to have to see where the Ether price settles and where the counterparty price settles as these things deploy. And they, despite having some pretty nice alpha product out already, they have probably six months and some change before we start to see like some mature instances come out where we can get a benchmark. So I wonder where costs will end up being, if Tau chains may end up being cheaper, for example. And if you've got this meta layer, which is independent of a given blockchain, so it could just be your VPS running an SQL database and some Node.js, like that's like a really basic way to hack something up. Or you could be like a securities issuer and you've got like your permission blockchain with like identifications for all of your customers because you have compliance issues. And then you're issuing tokens on a given blockchain, right? So let's say I issue securities representing real estate on Omni, and somebody loses their key, right? Well, we're not gonna like say that you burned like an apartment. You didn't burn the apartment. The apartment's still there. You just moved some shares in the wrong place. You made a goof, right? So we should be able to like blacklist that and issue new shares, or we should be able to take those shares in and destroy them on one blockchain and then issue them on another, in order to create financial resiliency and user resiliency. which is something that from my Doge party burning experience made me realize is actually like a fundamental it's like a fundamental thing for mainstream adoption, right? Like a lot of people don't want to touch Bitcoin because they're afraid that they might make a mistake and burn their money, right? Whereas with the bank, you can even buy something and then, and you legitimately decided to buy it, but you change your mind and they'll like refund your money and go after the merchant and get the money back, which is too much, right? But there's got to be a balance. So for ownership resiliency, multi-blockchain is great. For insurance, multi-blockchain is pretty good because if there's a 51% attack, the price of Bitcoin might crash, and my hedges on the Omni protocol might not be useful because I can't unwind them. It's like Bitcoin isn't working, or it won't work for like a few days until the smoke clears. So I think ultimately we're going to enter an environment where people are using these technologies. I don't want to say as commodities because they have different strengths and weaknesses, but definitely leaning on there's an unknown in will the longest chain rule be at one point exploited? 51% attacks less likely. And then there's another known unknown, which is like, will proof of stake, as it's implemented in Ethereum or other variations, ultimately be attacked? We have yet to see a significant attack. So whatever your app is doing, and financial, of course, is like has the highest premium on security. It makes a lot of sense to have operational resiliency, and I think people can start now before the smart contract, before the low level implementations are ready. They can start now doing decentralized apps, like Lazoo's, for example, is going to be on the Omni layer, and they're doing a decentralized Uber, right? So when people are driving miles in their app and they're contributing data to the ecosystem, they can award them they can just grant a token with an Omni transaction that's pretty simple, saying, okay, you've driven this many kilometers, and then they can do a pay to owners transaction that will take the zoos that they've created in Omni and send it to those people, right? And that's how they do their incentive system. So any data tokenization aspect, you can do that in Omni. You can do a lot of financial things in Omni. And frankly, I think if you're a startup, and I think you should do a prototype with a limited usage first, and then focus on how can you future-proof it so that it's always operating, so that even if a blockchain fails, you still have utility. But it's a beautiful time, and like we have all these tools, and you don't have to be a great programmer to use them. I'm very excited as somebody who's started programming full time like this year. Like it's a big deal, and all of these unicorns that Wall Street's been valuing at billions of dollars, like Uber is a good example. They will definitely be recapitulated in decentralized application form, and you're going to see crypto equity for DApps that are worth billions of dollars, and it might not be on Bitcoin, it might be on Ethereum, or it might be on maybe Blythe Masters will get them. We don't know, but yeah. So that's there's still kind of some sketchy R&D aspect to what I'm saying, because this is new stuff. The message for app developers is that you can use Omni today to begin doing token issuance and redemption and other dividends. So some decent tools to start with.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Let's Talk Bitcoin. This episode was sponsored by Tokenly and GetKeepKey.com. Content for this episode was provided by Patrick and Adam. This episode was very lightly edited by Adam B. Levine and featured music from Jared Rubens and General Fuzz. Any questions or comments? Email Adam at letstalkbitcoin.com. Have a good one.